What's up, everyone? We're here for another episode of Locked On Bucks. We're around 24 hours away from Game 2 in this second round series with the Boston Celtics, but we're still going to look back. We're going to look back at Game 1, some of the stuff we didn't get to in yesterday's post-game pod, rotations. What are the Celtics going to do with some of their lineups? Do they have any options? And the Bucks half-court offense is still potentially problematic. So we're going to get into all of that and more, so let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on the show Monday to Friday and on weekends post-game during the playoffs. You also find my other stuff over at ESPN, joining me, as he always does, at least once a week, usually twice, depending on how much I can hassle him to come on the show from the Bucks Radio Network. You can hear him pre-game, post-game, halftime on the radio, Justin Garcia. And I just want to let everyone in on a little secret here. So it took me a while to get the intro video going there. Now, we do share this streaming account with a few other podcasts, one being Locked On Brewers, which you should check that out, one being Locked On Pistons. And I accidentally hit the intro video for Locked On Brewers, which would have had our Wisconsin fans completely rattled, so apologies for that. But that's just some insider info on how we operate things here at Locked On Bucks. Justin,
I've been to a couple of games this year. Like this is the fastest or earliest I've been to a baseball game in like 3 or 4 years. So I could hold my own for about 2 minutes if you wanted to get into Brewers, but then it would quickly fizzle out.
I don't want to get into the Brewers unless we're talking sausage races. Those blue drinks that they have at the ballpark as well. I've had my fair share of those. But anyway, let's get back to the Bucks. And by the way, thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every day. YouTube, great numbers on yesterday's show. They're still going up. We're a little bit late, so we probably missed out on the early crowd there. But if you missed the post-game pod, go check it out. And make sure you comment in and having something to say on the video as well. That helps us with the video and the search and all those types of things, but it's also fun. I'm always in there responding to you guys as well. So, Justin, I spoke with Frank about this game. Everyone's heard my broad thoughts on this game, but 24 hours on, you've probably watched it again or watched bits and pieces of this game again. What stands out to you from game one?
I think one, what everybody would point to is just how incredible the Bucks defense was and how incredible I thought Wesley Matthews and Brook Lopez especially were in what they were able to accomplish. And also, before we started recording, we were kind of talking about our thoughts coming into the series, and I was very concerned. I think Frank and I, and that's not to say the series is over, obviously, but I was very concerned and thought margin for error is really slim here. So you got to capitalize and you got to win on the margins there a lot. And I was very surprised with how the Bucks came out in game one, because as we know, that's been the area where they've struggled most under Bud. And it's kind of two things rolled into one of haven't really played well on those noon tips, and they haven't really played well in game one. And, oh, by the way, you need shot creators against Boston, and you don't have maybe your best in the half court. So I didn't have high expectations for the early part of the series. I thought when it came back to Milwaukee, that's where the Bucks would have a chance to make this a series again. So for them to come out and play the way they did, you were kind of reminded of, oh yeah, the Bucks are the champions, and they won last year, that they've gone through this stuff that Boston hasn't. And I think if you had questions about the Celtics half court coming into this, or just their offense in general, they didn't go away after what happened in game one. So we all expect to see a lot of adjustments, but I don't know that it's going to be anything drastic here. It's just going to come down to Jason Tatum having to take over, certainly getting him some easy shots. But I guess the biggest takeaway is I was struck by, they didn't really work to get Jason Tatum a whole lot of good looks, that there wasn't a whole lot of two-man game or pick and roll. And I would imagine we're going to see a lot of that in game two. Yeah,
it's interesting. And I think, and this is typically what happens, and there was a lot of stats going around about the road team when they win game one. It actually, historically, in certainly in recent times, it doesn't mean a lot. And we've seen it before. We saw it the last time the Bucks played the Celtics, where it changed dramatically. And there's a lot of weird scenarios that play into game ones. We talk about the Bucks having a few days off, but the Celtics had even longer. So there's a number of factors. And typically with this game two now, you're going to have to weather a storm. And we can think about it last year with the Bucks as well. They lose game one to Atlanta. That was a shock. The next game, it was virtually over by the end of the first period. So, look, the Bucks are going to have to weather a storm. The Celtics spoke about the fact that they were shocked by the physicality of the Bucks. I'm kind of surprised that they actually said that. Because it was no surprise that that was the way that the Bucks were going to play. But perhaps what they mean is, and Frank kind of pointed to this, they've come off a relatively soft defensive series, and a series that was actually really, really competitive. It's about as competitive as a sweep can be, but certainly on the defensive side of the ball, for guys like Tatum and guys like Jaylen Brown and all these players, didn't have to work all that hard to get their shots. And so, you know, all of a sudden then you're getting full court pressure from Drew Holiday, from Javon Carter, and these players. So I do think there is something to be said that the Celtics probably got a little bit of a wake-up call. Now, the question is, do they actually have an answer to the physicality? That's what remains to be seen. But they'll understand what's coming in game two.
You know what's funny is, and I took it as, I'm sure part of it was, we saw the same thing with the Bucks, 3 years ago when they played the Celtics the first time, that you blew through the Pistons and won that series by 100 points, and then you get the Celtics. And granted, you won it in 5, but it was much different to go from the Pistons to the Celtics in game 1 of that series. So I'm sure part of it was that, but I think also part of it was Boston legitimately thought they were the tougher team and were going to be able to be physical, because you could do that against Brooklyn, and then to come out in game 1 and see, oh, well, maybe at best we're as tough as this team. But, that's the extent of it. And, just talking before about, I was I was very surprised by how the Bucks were able to dictate everything. And Boston, we saw in the second half, they were running some of those Spain pick and rolls to try and get Jason Tatum better looks, and to not a whole lot of success. But I would imagine we're going to see a lot of that. But I've also seen a few people point to, well, what do you do differently if you're the Celtics? And it's things like that. And, to try and get whoever Brook Lopez is defending, if that's Robert Williams, if it's Daniel Tice, if he's on the floor, whoever it is, get them in the pick and roll to get him matched up onto Jason Tatum. But part of it is the Bucks were incredible and have been now throughout the playoffs at fighting through those screens and staying with their guy, that I don't know that you can count on that for success. And also, one of the other things kicked around was, I think it was Nate Duncan that mentioned, well, what if you change the lineup and you change how you use Robert Williams and you bring him off the bench when Brook Lopez leaves? I mean, sure, but then you're limiting his minutes, and you're also allowing the Bucks to just totally bully you. I get that if you play smaller, you can theoretically spread them out more, but as we've seen with the point of defense there from Drew and from Wesley Matthews and everybody else, the Bucks are more than fine with living with, if the Celtics are going to spread them out, depending on who it is, go ahead. Like, take that 3 if it means Al Horford and Grant Williams, if that's who moves in the starting lineup, is getting those looks. They're not going to care. So I just see that as an advantage for the Bucks, a major one.
Yeah, this is really interesting, because I think the Rob Williams stuff is the lineup question mark for the Celtics moving forward. And I want to keep getting into that, because I do think it's really interesting. But I also think Prize Picks is really interesting. So NBA fans, if you're looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA, then you need to try the award-winning app, Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. I love this app, and we know you will too. Now, I'll just give you a little bit of an explanation here of what we're dealing with Prize Picks. So you pick 2 to 5 players and an over and under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus the projected numbers. So in game 1, if you had Giannis 20-plus points, you're feeling pretty good. If you had Drew Holiday 20-plus points, you're feeling good. Bobby Portis 10-plus points, you're feeling good. Bobby Portis, a double-double machine, by the way, in the postseason. Keep that in mind. And it's just you versus the projected numbers, as I mentioned there. Prize Picks offers safe and offers fast withdrawals, and uses the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. So it offers any prop you can think of, from points scored to rebounds, even steals as well. Steals a big factor in game 1. Prize Picks allows mixed sports entries as well. We were talking about the Brewers, but if you want to do some Bucks and Brewers combinations, you can do that. And as I mentioned, it's not just NBA, NFL when it's around, MLB, soccer, all those types of things as well. So Prize Picks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all our users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point, but you must use code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today and use the code NBA for $50 free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. That's Prize Picks, daily fantasy made easy. So Rob Williams, and this was a big talking point when we did the crossover pod because, again, you talk about a guy defensively that has probably snuck up on a lot of people, and maybe there's not a widespread awareness of what he can do on the defensive end, his versatility, how he moves, how he can block shots. But on offense, we've seen time and time again, if you've got a big man that isn't going to shoot the ball, the Bucks are not going to be too worried about you. Now, the difference with Rob Williams, though, is he is a genuine lob threat. And we have seen, going back a couple of seasons even, where if you have that lob threat, I'm thinking about guys like Trae Young, for instance, that's had some big games against the Bucks with a guy like Capella, who doesn't shoot, but he's been able to be a factor. But I think, when it comes to Brook Lopez, one of the things that's underrated, because everyone around the league plays drop coverage, and everyone talks about it, and it's one of the most easiest defensive strategies to say, okay, that's what they're playing. But Brook Lopez does it better than anyone in terms of being able to stay attached to the big man and also recover and contest a shot if it's a floater, if it's a mid-range shot. And Rob Williams was really just an absolute non-factor on the offensive end yesterday. Now, whether or not that continues to be the case, we will see. But the Bucks are winning if they take Rob Williams out of the lineup because they need him in there for Giannis on the other end of the floor because the Bucks don't have many creators in this lineup anymore. And we saw, even if you look yesterday, the Bucks were plus 23 in Giannis's 38 minutes, which means in the 10 minutes he was off the floor, they were outscored by 11 points. That's going to be the key to the series. Giannis, can you stay out of foul trouble, first of all, so you can play 40 minutes a night? And then it's going to be damage control when Giannis is off the floor. But for all the talk of Al Horford did a decent job, he did. But Rob Williams was lurking around, and these other guys helping once Giannis does get by. Al Horford is the key. So I can understand why there might be some thoughts about taking Rob Williams off. But if you do, I think that's a massive win down the other end of the floor.
It's a huge win. And look, it's not Daniel Tice that you would play more. He played 4 minutes in game one. And just going down the line here, if you take Robert Williams out there and you try to kind of stack where you play him differently, if that means more minutes for Grant Williams, or I saw somebody else suggest Derek White, again, these are areas, if you're the Bucks, you would say, perfect. Put 2 more guys that are in that group of players that we're willing to concede open looks to. And that's just going to help the Bucks defense even more. So if I'm Boston, we got to play with the same starting 5, but we've just got to, whether it's, running the 2-man game with Rob Williams and Jason Tatum or what it is, we've got to get Jason Tatum freed up or make more of an effort to get him freed up and get him into his rhythm a lot more. But, the other part of it too, and I wouldn't anticipate this to change, is the Bucks picking the Celtics up full length of the floor seemed to really throw them off and startle them as well. And if you're doing that, we saw that at times last year against the Nets too. If you're doing that, you're taking 8 seconds or 7 seconds off of the shot clock for them to get into things, and the Bucks are already getting their defense set. That is a major advantage for the Bucks as well. So, to me, I talked about this with somebody else earlier on the radio today. The defense is what you can expect going forward for the Bucks. Like, this is going to be the defense they're going to keep playing. It's just, are the results going to be the same? And I fully expect Celtics were 18 of 50 from 3. I fully expect they're going to have a game where they hit 20 or 24 threes, and Al Horford or Marcus Smart or somebody is going to hit 7 threes, and that's going to be a game that they win. But the Bucks are more than willing to say, okay, that's going to happen once. Maybe it happens twice. The rest of the time, this defense is going to prevail.
And look, I don't want to well, people that listen to this podcast that have for a long time know that I really don't talk about officials a lot. And most of the time I say, for a game like yesterday, I thought there was missed calls both ways. I like that style of basketball. But the one thing that go on.
Well, no, I was just going to say the one thing that struck me about officiating yesterday. I agree that it went both ways. It was just so inconsistent from quarter to quarter of what you were allowed to do, and then the next quarter it's officiated differently.
Yeah, no question. But the one thing that was very noticeable was the Celtics' constant complaining. They seemed very distracted by the officials throughout this game. There was a lot of flopping going on. I mentioned Marcus Smart. He was diving all over the floor. The most hilarious one was under the basket, and I went back and watched it last night where I don't know what Javon Carter did. Maybe a pinky in his back. And Marcus Smart went flying forward and then pointed at Javon Carter like he just attacked him from behind. But the officials will play a part in this series because of that physicality and because of the way Drew Holiday wants to defend and the way Giannis wants to defend, and also Giannis's physicality and sometimes putting his hands where they shouldn't be, using his body the way he probably shouldn't use it. And the Bucks just simply cannot afford those guys in foul trouble, extended foul trouble. Drew Holiday picked up the 2 early fouls. That looked like a huge danger moment for Milwaukee in the first quarter. They were able to withstand that. But Giannis getting in foul trouble as well could have cost the Bucks. And I already spoke about the fact they were minus 11 in the time that he was off the floor. But we should give the Bucks some credit for the final 3:37 of the third quarter. The Bucks were up by 6 at the time. Giannis gives away that awful foul.
It was a dumb foul, yeah.
He's annoyed at himself. You could see that. Bud is annoyed at him. You could see that. But the Bucks were able to withstand it. And they went into the final quarter up by 8. So they were +2 in those final 3:37. I think it was +2, +2, +3. Yep. Anyway, in the final 3:37, which quite honestly was one of the most important stretches of the game.
I thought the two biggest stretches of the game were that, and then as crazy as it is to suggest, you already mentioned you're going to have to withstand charges or I guess withstand runs of the teams is in the first quarter. It was the Celtics up by 7 or 8, where it really felt like at times it could have been teetering, and the Garden was about to explode when Jaylen Brown had that putback dunk over Giannis. Yeah. I think that made the margin 7, but then the Bucks just quietly went on a 10-0 run and took a 3-point lead into the quarter, which in the blink of an eye, the Celtics went from having all the energy and up by 7 to thinking, okay, there's been a lot of turnovers. The Bucks could be wobbly here to the Bucks are opening up the second quarter in front.
Yeah, Pat Connaughton hit a big 3. And by the way, he didn't shoot the ball. Bobby Portis, and Pat didn't shoot the ball all that well in the first round series, but he did knock down a couple late in the series, and you're like, okay, maybe it's starting to turn for him a little bit. He's been so reliable, but you're right. When you're playing on the road, particularly, being able to hit those threes, those momentum-killing threes are just huge. And the big reason for that, if you're not knocking down those threes, then they generate transition possessions. And we saw in this game, this was a big talking point for the Celtics as well, was the fact that the Bucks were able to score heavily off turnovers. And that will be a key moving forward because, as we mentioned, the half-court offense for both teams was absolutely horrific in this game, which is exactly why I was talking to a few people in the YouTube comments about this after that. I said, I hope the Bucks go and sweep this series. I would love that. That would be absolutely fantastic. But I just think that there was enough on the offensive end, which we might get to now, to just say, okay, this is some of the concerns we had coming into the series. How do the Bucks rectify that? But I mentioned yesterday the Bucks now favorites in the East. It's incredible the way things changed after just one game. But you can get all the odds at betonline.net. It's your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. You can also check out the series between Miami and Philadelphia. Miami heavy favorites in that series. We just saw game 1 as we're recording this. No Joel Embiid. And Justin, DeAndre Jordan, to the surprise of none, not a difference maker in this series. Doc Rivers really sticking to his guns, Justin.
DeAndre Jordan, to the surprise of none that have followed Doc Rivers, playing heavy minutes in this game, I think you would point out.
Old friends, Doc and DJ. But if you do believe that the Sixers are a chance in this series, Joel Embiid, maybe he's going to play in game 3. We'll see. You can get all the odds, props, and everything else you need regarding NBA playoffs at betonline.net, as well as other sports, esports, baseball, hockey. I know you're a hockey man, Justin. Every other sport you can find what's going on, just head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, offensively, look, we know Giannis was 9 for 25, as we mentioned on yesterday's podcast. You'd love to knock down a few more of those layups there for Giannis. Certainly those shots around the basket, and he probably will. It's Giannis. It's pretty rare when he has those types of nights that they continue for multiple games in a row. What else can they do offensively, though? Because the Bucks are always better with Giannis on the floor, and I know I've harped on the plus-minus a little bit here, but particularly in this series where previously you at least have Chris Middleton to keep the scoreboard ticking over if you need to find a basket when things get sticky. And we have to give Bobby Portis a lot of credit, because some of those sort of post-up baseline possessions that he got, and he's just been knocking down that shot. And this is the benefit of having a bigger lineup as well. A lot of the times he was on Jaylen Brown, who's an excellent defender, and Bobby Portis was just like, I'm literally too big. I can get this shot. But he's been saving the Bucks with some of these buckets that he's been getting. You would love to see Milwaukee able to perhaps generate some easier scores. And Brook Lopez is the easy guy to point to who could be a factor.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest, Brook Lopez. But I mean, also it's part of that too, depending on the matchups. I think it's just feeding Bobby more, because he's the guy. When you talk about the absence of Chris Middleton, he may not be the first one that comes to mind just because of the position he plays. But to me, he's the guy you have that could best replicate some of those things Chris does from where he gets his shot off. And as we've seen, when he's facing the basket like that, Bobby's just a bucket. And especially if he has a smaller guy on him. And if it's Jaylen Brown, as we saw a couple of times in this series, whoever the matchup is, we saw it against the Bulls too, when DeMar DeRozan was the guy defending him. Bobby has that advantage. He's going to be able to score. So I think the two that would make the most sense would be just getting into Bobby Portis more, and Brook Lopez, certainly what he's been able and capable of giving you offensively, especially the last week of the regular season, and how he looked at times against the Bulls. He's certainly capable of giving you some of that as well. I also think it's interesting to see some of the comments that came out of Celtics practice earlier today from Ime Udoka over how they kind of viewed game one and some of the things they could potentially do. And I saw, I don't remember if it was Udoka or one of their players mentioning what Udoka said, but basically the insinuation of, we felt like we doubled Giannis too quickly. So now we are willing to just wait and be more deliberate about how we do that, and not send the help quite as quickly, with the fear of, that left Pat Connaughton and Grayson Allen and the other shooters open. And he was great at making that pass and those reads. And part of me thinks it's kind of like what the Bucks have been willing to bet on here in this series, and saying, okay, if Grant Williams has an open look, if Peyton Pritchard has an open look, fine. Like, we don't think they're going to shoot better than 30%. If the Celtics do that for a majority of the game tomorrow, I think that's a major advantage for the Bucks, because if Giannis is not facing those doubles, I think back to that series 3 years ago when it was the same thing, and that was at the height of Al Horford is the Giannis stopper. And as that series went on, you could see Giannis figured out how to play against Al Horford more and more. And to me, one of the moments that stood out yesterday was, I think it was the third quarter, and it was the sequence where Drew Holiday was matched up on Al, and he took him all the way to the basket and scored on him rather easily. And it's things like that where you can see, okay, Drew did this, and Giannis just learns from those things, and that triggers things for him too. That I think if the Celtics hold off on doubling and say, we want to stay home on some of those shooters, Wesley Matthews is the guy that you're willing to sag off of more, but we want to stay home on Grayson Allen and Bobby and whoever else it is, and we're going to hesitate doubling Giannis till it gets a little later there. I think he's going to be able to go to work, and I think he's going to figure out how to attack. And especially if Robert Williams isn't on the floor or isn't, looking like the guy he looked like in the first quarter defensively, that's going to be a major advantage for the Bucks and for Giannis, and that's a way to offset some of those half-court struggles.
The Drew Holiday drive on Horford was kind of funny, because at the time, as you mentioned, he did score pretty easily. And we know that Drew can do that. He loves being physical. He loves playing that bully ball style, I guess, if you want to call that, for a guard. And I was like, why did Drew do that so easily? Giannis, take this old man and put him under the basket. But to your point about the doubles, and I read some of that stuff as well, and I found it really interesting because I do think there's something to be said for just at least seeing what Giannis is going to do in one-on-one.
Yeah.
Is he going to be baited into shooting those turnarounds all night long or jump shots? But the other point is that some of the doubles, if I'm Boston, some of the doubles were coming from the man directly next to Giannis. So it's like, if you're going to make Giannis pass out of a double, like at least make it difficult.
Yeah.
And if you're defending Grayson Allen on the right wing and Giannis has the ball on the right baseline and you help off Grayson Allen and he literally just has to pass it a couple of feet to his right and it's an open three, then yeah, you're asking for trouble. So I just thought they needed to be a bit more strategic with when the doubles were coming, where they were coming from. But Giannis is so smart right now that he's able to make that sort of cross-court pass to the corner as well with relatively accurate there as well. But the other point is, if you're going to go one-on-one with Giannis, then how are the Bucks able to utilize the guy that's in the dunker spot a little bit? Because he should be able to get to the paint easy enough. And then is he going to score? Because the help will eventually come. It's Giannis that everyone's drawn into trying to stop him at the rim. So when it does come, is he able to dump it off? Are they able to use Brook Lopez? There was a couple of times in game one where, and we've seen it throughout the year with smaller lineups when Brook is out there, but they literally just throw the ball up. And Brook it's almost like he doesn't even jump. He just sticks his hands up, catches the ball, and lays it in. So can they utilize his size if the Celtics do decide to go a little bit small as well? So I think there's options there, but I do think the Bucks are going to have to get a little bit more creative. And the reality is they are going to have to rely on the three-point shot, and they're going to have to hope that they have a pretty good series shooting the ball if they want to generate those points there. Now, they weren't red hot from three in game one. First half, really good. Second half, they cooled off. But 101 points, maybe in this series, that'll be a winning score. Generally, it's not, but we'll see. There were still some concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, not to be a homer, but the really encouraging part is
you could do it.
You won the game and you made 2 threes in the second half. That you look at the first half and they were I think 10 of 20 on threes in the first half. And certainly that's what you would point to and say, okay, this isn't totally sustainable. They were relatively good looks and open threes that they were taking because of some of the doubles on Giannis, but still you're not going to shoot 50% in all likelihood for the game. So they went 2 of 14 in the second half. They just, again, were even more incredible and saying, okay, you're not getting anything inside the 2-point line. And I think the most alarming thing, if you're the Celtics, is this Bucks team had a pretty good training ground for this. I guess I would say it's obviously not quite as good, but going 5-game series against Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan, that's a pretty good on-ramp for what you're going to do against Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now, obviously, you trust the shooters and the players around those two more with the Celtics than you do with the Bulls, but still, that's a pretty close to like for like in terms of what you can expect from offensive shot profile. So the Bucks got a pretty good sense of training in that first round matchup. And as we said at the start, Celtics had nowhere near that with just a bad Brooklyn Nets team. And those were still competitive games. That 16 points decided the 4-game series, or 18, whatever it was. I mean, when you look at the Celtics offensive and defensive rating in the playoffs too, it's basically a net rating of 0, that they've been around 110 on both sides of the ledger, which is nowhere near what they were in the regular season, especially from January onward. And yeah, the Bucks dominated them statistically there in game 1, but that doesn't bode well for how you looked by the numbers in a 4-game sweep against the Brooklyn Nets. So I think this was really helpful for the Bucks to get that training out of the way. And Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, I think it was 2 mid-range shots combined that they attempted in this game. And these are both guys that average, about a third of their shots are coming from the mid-range. So that was the big point of contention with this drop defense for a while, is too many threes and too many of those mid-range shots. But what we've seen is, one area that we may have really undervalued here coming into the series is the offenses that gave the Bucks the most problems when they were running that was not so much just those that had those guys like DeRozan and Jason Tatum that can get those tough mid-range shots, but you also need the point guard that's going to make things difficult and is going to hit those shots. Marcus Smart is not that guy. So even if you get Marcus Smart going in a two-man game, you're going to let Marcus Smart take those shots. And as crazy as it is to say, it was when you had, years ago with Boston with Kemba Walker, who, for all the flaws that he does have, he can get to that spot and hit those shots that puts the stress on that drop defense. So I do think that's a big area that's playing into the Bucks' hand of, if this is the guy that's initiating the offense, we're not concerned with him. So we can press up a little more and just take Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown's mid-range game out of it altogether.
Yeah, Marcus Smart's been credited, a lot for sort of the turnaround on offense. We know what he's done defensively, but the turnaround on offense as a playmaker and as a point guard for this team. If you remember in their struggles early in the season, all the talking points were this team needs a point guard desperately. What we do know is playoff defense is obviously different to the regular season. The Bucks defense is clearly different in the postseason. I thought we saw enough evidence during the regular season in big games, particularly in the fourth quarter when the Bucks said, okay, let's ramp this up now. Let's get physical. Let's play the way we want to play defense. We saw it. But the reality is the way that the Bucks played defense in game one against Boston is absolutely not sustainable during the regular season. You could not do that night in, night out. So we saw him ramp it up last year in the postseason. We've seen it over the last few playoff games here after a pretty scratchy start. So we'll see. It seems sustainable to me with the players that they have, but we'll see if they can carry it through. Now, go ahead. What do you got?
No, I was just going to echo that. I like I said, I think this defense is sustainable. The results probably aren't, and that's not to say things drastically turn around. But like we said at the top, I mean, there's going to be at least one game where the Celtics hit 20 or 23, 24 threes, and they win the game by that. So, but I don't think that's going to force the Bucks to drastically alter. And I think they look at what happened in game one of this series and say, okay, this is everything we thought would happen. We know it's not going to be those same results every single game, but we think a majority of these games, this is what's going to happen, and this is on our side.
Yeah, and as you know, this is always the case with with 3-point shooting. If the Celtics hit a bunch of threes yesterday, then the talking point would be that the Bucks defense has problems. They didn't hit threes, so the talking point is the Bucks defense is absolutely elite. This is the game, and if you make shots, you'll change the course of the game and the narrative and the talking points and everything like that. But the point is, when teams, as Frank keeps pointing out at the start, I think it's 10-1 or 11-1 when teams shoot 50 plus threes. So, look, the Bucks, for the most part, choose the guys who they want to be shooting those volume threes.
Although the other interesting thing, I guess, that kind of reaffirms this, if you're a Bucks fan, is the everybody that came to love this last year when you were clinging to hope in the Nets series and the Sun series, the Shot Quality Twitter account. They still had the Bucks winning the game yesterday. I think it was something like 103-99 or something. The margin was obviously closer, but based on the shot quality that each team took, they still said, yeah, the Bucks win this game, 9 times out of 10 or whatever it is, that they took the better quality shots, and the shooters that they gave up those open looks to, those were better quality looks defensively for the Bucks than they were offensive looks for the Celtics.
All right, let's wrap this up. A bit of a programming note tomorrow. At this stage, I'm traveling, which, by the way, I haven't been near an airport. I haven't been in a plane. I haven't left the state that I live in since I came home from Milwaukee in 2020 when the NBA shut down, and I came home to Australia for what I thought was a month, and I would be moving back to Milwaukee. So I actually won't be able to watch this game live, or I might be able to watch the game live, but I won't be able to do a post-game pod. But the good news is that Frank will be there, and Camille will be there, And the big question is, can Camille keep Frank under control? That is the question that we will find out the answer to post-game pod. I can't wait to listen. I'll be listening. I'll be watching. That's for sure, with great intrigue. But hopefully the Bucks are 2-0 up by that point in time. But they'll be back for the post-game pod, so make sure you check it out. If you haven't checked us out on YouTube, make sure you do that. Hit subscribe and all those types of things. We really appreciate it. Justin, enjoy the call tomorrow. Hopefully it's a happy post-game show.
Yeah, let's hope so.
All right. Like I said, post-game show tomorrow. We'll be back. I'll be back the day after as we keep rolling through the week. The Bucks and Celtics will speak to you guys then.